Emma Carter believed endings came quickly, because she had seen them her whole life. Friendships fading after college, promises breaking after winter, love losing strength once routine settled in, and on a quiet October evening in Portland, Oregon, she sat alone in a corner cafe, with a half-cold cup of coffee, telling herself that starting over meant expecting less, not more, when the bell above the door rang and Daniel Reed walked in for the first time. Tall, neat, polite, ordering tea instead of coffee, choosing the table by the window, reading a worn paperback, barely looking around, and Emma noticed him only because he stayed longer than most customers, not rushing, not checking his phone, just being there, and when he smiled politely at her while leaving, she thought nothing of it, assuming like all brief encounters it would vanish. But the next night he returned at the same hour, same calm presence, and the night after that Lucas Bennett appeared, different in every visible way. Louder without being rude, smiling at the barista, joking about the rain, sitting closer to Emma's table without forcing conversation, and when he finally spoke to her it was easy, natural, like two people already mid-story, and Emma answered without thinking, because loneliness lowers defenses faster than reason, and she told herself it was harmless, that people drift in and out of cafes all the time, that attention fades, that interest burns fast and dies faster, especially towards someone like her who carried quiet sadness and no intention of inviting trouble. Yet the days moved quickly, the air grew colder, and both men kept appearing, never together, never overlapping, almost like the city itself was testing her patience. Daniel asking thoughtful questions about her work as a graphic designer, listening closely, remembering small details, Lucas sharing stories about his job in marketing, his restless nature, his hope to someday feel settled, and Emma felt something stir that she tried to ignore, a sense of being seen from two different angles, one gentle and steady, the other warm and alive, and she laughed more than she meant to, spoke longer than planned, stayed later than intended, all while telling herself it was temporary, that novelty always tricks the heart before leaving it empty again, and when the barista teased her lightly about her new regulars, Emma shrugged it off, claiming coincidence, but inside she felt the pull tightening, the uncomfortable awareness that both men were choosing to return, not out of habit, but interest, and she tested the situation silently, giving shorter replies one night, avoiding eye contact the next, arriving late another evening, waiting for boredom to do its work, waiting for absence to feel easier than presence, yet nothing changed. Daniel still greeted her with that calm smile, Lucas still noticed when she seemed tired, and Emma's belief began to crack under the weight of consistency, because people were supposed to leave when things weren't clear. People were supposed to chase certainty or move on, and neither man did either. They stayed within the space she allowed, respectful, patient, real, and it unsettled her more than pressure ever could. Memories of her last relationship rising like fog, the way promises once sounded strong before turning thin, the way effort faded once comfort settled in, and she wondered if this was how it always started, quietly, with small kindnesses that later demanded more than they gave. So one evening she left the cafe early without saying goodbye, walking home under streetlights with her hands shaking slightly, telling herself she needed distance, that hope was dangerous, that patterns always repeat. But the next day a folded napkin waited for her at the counter with Daniel's careful handwriting saying only that he hoped her evening had gone well, and later that night a message from Lucas appeared on her phone saying he'd missed their conversation and wished her a good night. And neither message asked anything of her, neither demanded explanation, neither accused her of pulling away, and that was when Emma felt the story change shape, not loudly, not suddenly, but enough to make her pause, enough to make her realize this wasn't a game of attention, but a quiet test of endurance. And as she sat alone again with coffee growing cold, watching rain streak the window, Emma thought the words she hadn't wanted to admit, that she had expected them to tire fast, expected interest to fade, expected the world to behave the way it always had, but instead it kept showing up, again and again, asking nothing, offering presence, and for the first time in a long while, Emma felt afraid not of being left, but of what it might mean if someone stayed. Emma Carter could no longer pretend the small gestures didn't matter. The way Daniel remembered her favorite books, the way he asked about her workday before she even mentioned it, the gentle patience in his voice when she rambled about projects or frustrations, and Lucas, who somehow noticed the tiniest shifts in her mood, who laughed at her jokes before she even finished them, whose energy pulled her into conversation when all she wanted was to be left alone, made her heart feel restless in ways she hadn't felt for years, and she told herself to stay cautious, to not let attachment grow, to guard the fragile space she had built around herself after heartbreak. Yet she found herself staying longer at the cafe, lingering over drinks, watching Daniel's steady, thoughtful expressions, feeling warmth in Lucas's easy laughter, sensing a pull in two completely different directions, one calm, one bright, both claiming parts of her attention without demanding it. And she was torn between logic and feeling, knowing she couldn't choose yet, not when her heart was still fragile, yet feeling guilty for enjoying both, for wanting both, for letting herself imagine futures she wasn't ready to embrace, and she began testing the limits of her own resolve, avoiding Daniel for a day, skipping Lucas another, hoping the distance would clarify her feelings, but both responded with kindness, neither reproachful nor impatient, Daniel leaving a note saying he hoped she was okay, Lucas sending a simple message wishing her a good evening, and each act made her wonder if perhaps care didn't always need a reward, if presence itself was enough to stir emotion, and Emma realized that the feelings she had tried to suppress were growing, that she was noticing how Daniel's calm steadiness made her feel safe, how Lucas's warmth made her feel alive, and she started observing herself with a strange mix of fear and fascination, aware that people usually leave, that interest usually fades, that her own history was a record of transient affection, yet here were two men defying her expectations, returning night after night, creating a rhythm she couldn't ignore, and she found herself craving their words, anticipating their smiles, feeling a tension that was emotional and romantic without physicality, a gentle pull that made her both excited and anxious, wondering if she would ever have to choose, or if she could even choose, and the thought of losing either made her chest tighten, her thoughts racing as she walked home in the cool Portland air, replaying conversations in her mind, noticing details she hadn't before, like the way Daniel's eyes lingered a moment too long, or how Lucas's hand brushed against the mug when he laughed, and every memory, every small interaction, wove a story she hadn't planned to be part of, and it scared her, because it was real, unpredictable, and outside her control, yet impossible to resist, and she began to understand that perhaps love wasn't about speed or certainty, but about endurance, about showing up, being present, and staying even when it was hard or inconvenient. And as the days blurred together, Emma realized that neither man had tired, neither had left, neither had given up, and she was forced to confront her own preconceptions about relationships, about attachment, about what it meant to care and to be cared for, and in that realization, a mix of hope and fear swelled inside her, making her wonder if this was how life might change, slowly, quietly, with patience and attention, with steady presence and warmth, and she felt both exhilarated and overwhelmed by the thought that what she had assumed would fade fast had not only stayed but grown, that the men she had dismissed as temporary fixtures in her life were now proving themselves real, consistent, unwavering, and in the midst of her inner turmoil, she understood that the lesson was not about choice or strategy, but about feeling, about letting herself be moved, about acknowledging longing and attraction without judgment, and even as she grappled with the complexity of her emotions, she felt a strange clarity forming, a recognition that this story was unfolding in a way she had never expected, that the very persistence she had doubted was what made her heart stir. And as she sat again, at her favorite corner of the cafe, sipping coffee she hadn't really tasted, Emma realized that this chapter of her life was only beginning, that emotional tension was growing in ways she couldn't yet name, that romance could be gentle, dramatic, and transformative without a single declaration, and that the simple act of people continuing to care, to notice, to stay, was enough to make her world feel profoundly different. And as the sun set over the rainy Portland streets, she felt a mixture of longing, anticipation, and fear, knowing that the story she thought would be fleeting was far from over, that her heart was awake in a way it hadn't been for years, and that she had no idea where this endurance, this quiet, unrelenting care, would ultimately lead her. The evening Emma had been quietly dreading arrived sooner than she expected, the sky heavy with rain and the streets glistening under the city lights, as she agreed to meet Daniel and Lucas separately, not knowing how she would navigate the tension in her chest, And when she met Daniel first at the small park near the cafe, he spoke with a calm honesty that both reassured and unsettled her, telling her he had no hidden agenda, no need to compete or prove himself, that his care for her was genuine, but not demanding, that he didn't seek to win her heart in a race, but simply wanted to be present. And his words struck her, because they mirrored the quiet patience she had noticed in him all along, the way he remembered her details, the way he noticed her moods without pressing. And later, meeting Lucas at a nearby street corner under the dim glow of a lamp, she braced herself for confrontation or awkwardness, but instead he smiled softly, almost apologetically, admitting he knew about Daniel and that he didn't feel threatened or in competition, explaining that he stayed because he valued connection, because he wanted her happiness even if it didn't mean being with him. And in that moment, Emma's assumptions about romance, about rivalry, about choice, began to crumble, because neither man was demanding a decision, neither was pushing her toward clarity, both were simply being sincere, being present, and her heart raced with a mixture of relief and confusion as she realized that the quiet endurance she had misread as persistence was actually respect, care, and understanding. And she thought about all the nights she had tried to test them, distancing herself, hoping one would tire, wondering if interest would fade, and now she saw that it wasn't about who would win. It was about who would be patient enough to let her heart unfold on its own terms. And the irony struck her sharply that she had feared this endurance at first, feared being trapped by attention, only to find that it was the consistency, the unwavering presence, that made her feel safest, most alive, most seen. And as she walked home afterward, rain dripping from her coat, she replayed the conversations, the smiles, the gentleness that neither man had abandoned, and realized that she had misunderstood love all along, believing it to be fleeting, conditional, fragile, when in reality it could be steady, generous, patient, allowing room for uncertainty, for fear, for hesitation, and yet still existing powerfully. And for the first time in months, maybe years, Emma felt a strange sense of possibility, a recognition that connection wasn't a race to claim or a challenge to survive. It was a quiet, persistent presence, a willingness to stay without expectation, to care without condition, and she understood that the men she had assumed would tire fast had proven her wrong, showing her that love could be patient, respectful, and enduring even when hearts were unsure, even when choices were unclear. And the weight of that realization pressed against her chest with both warmth and tension, filling her with gratitude and fear, because she knew that the next steps she took would matter, not just in choosing who she might love, but in understanding herself, in acknowledging her longing, her hesitation, her attraction, and the fact that she felt deeply for two people without either demanding her heart made her question everything she thought she knew about romance, about loyalty, about desire. And she finally allowed herself to admit that she had been afraid not of love, but of its endurance, that she had feared commitment to feelings that might overwhelm her, and yet, seeing both Daniel and Lucas willing to continue caring without forcing a choice, without rushing her, she felt an unprecedented clarity, a sense that the people who truly matter don't need to compete or conquer, they simply stay. And in that slow, gentle revelation, Emma felt her heart opening in a way that was both thrilling and terrifying, realizing that she had been wrong to expect interest to fade, wrong to assume people would tire, and that the patience, the presence, the quiet care she had underestimated all along, was exactly what made love real. And as she reached her apartment, dripping wet from the rain, but with a heart unexpectedly full, she thought about how differently life could unfold when people showed up not for their own desire to win, but for the sake of connection itself. And she recognized that the story she had been living was not about competition or drama, but about endurance, about the power of remaining when everything in her past had taught her that attention would vanish. And the emotional weight of that realization settled over her, heavy yet comforting, because she finally understood that love didn't always demand immediate decisions or dramatic gestures, that it could grow quietly, insistently, persistently, and that the people who refused to tire, Daniel and Lucas, had given her the most profound gift she hadn't realized she needed, the chance to feel seen, valued, and deeply cared for without pressure. And as she sat on her couch, dripping rainwater and adrenaline, she smiled softly to herself, knowing that the nights of waiting, questioning, and fearing were not wasted, because they had led her to witness something rare and beautiful, A love that didn't need to rush, a devotion that didn't need to boast, a connection that simply stayed unbroken. And she realized with a mix of awe and fear that her heart would never be the same, that the men who had continued to care had changed the way she understood desire, patience, and romantic possibility. And she felt herself on the edge of something transformative, the quiet, emotional tension of not